Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another live tutorial from Davies Media Design. This is a live photo editing session. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's live photo editing session we're going to be editing this photo here of somebody who I've dubbed a cowgirl, and we took this in Denver, of course, in a little shop. This was like a trinket sort of shop at Denver's Union Station. And so welcome guys if you're just joining me here, and we're going to be editing this using not only my 10-step photo editing process that I always talk about in these live sessions, but I'm also going to be doing a little bit of airbrushing for this tutorial, and also I'm going to be enhancing the eyes. So those are a couple things that I haven't done in my last tutorials, and so yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy this one, and I'm just going to wait a second here until a few of you guys join. Let me know if the audio is okay, and hopefully you guys were able to get to the link easy enough. If not, let me know. Before I dive in too, I'm going to just let you guys know, of course, as always, you can visit my website at daviesmediadesign.com. We have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check that out. You can also support us and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And I do want to mention, because I have gotten a couple emails recently about, giving one-time donations. I know some of you do want to support the channel, but you don't want to be, part of a monthly donation subscription, which is what Patreon is. I do now have a button down here where you can click on that to donate. I had that before, but the button wasn't working properly, but it should be working properly now. So when you click that, I'll just show you real quick if it'll work. Looks like it's working. So it's going to take you to this page here where it's going to ask you how much you want to donate. You could do a one-time donation, or you can make it a monthly donation, so that's completely up to you. And of course, you can enroll in my GIMP 2.10 photo editing masterclass from beginner to pro, and I always have a discount link, so instead of $199.99, it'll be $9.99 for you guys. So heavily discounted here. Just check out the discount link in the description of this tutorial. So let me go ahead and minimize this here. Hey Victor, thanks for joining us again, and Ano as well, thank you for joining. Glad everything's running okay. And where did you guys get the link to this? I want to make sure the links on social media are working properly. You may have received your link via a notification on YouTube. If you did get here from a link on social media, let me know, or if you guys want to run over to my Facebook and double check that the link is working, that would be awesome. Don't feel obligated though. Anyway, so I'm going to zoom out here a little bit on this image, and I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my file window here, and this is going to allow me to search for the original image. So here is the original image right here, and this one's a bit larger because it's a RAW file. I'm just going to do the JPEG file. So right-click and go to Open With and choose GNU Image Manipulation Program, which is, of course, what GIMP stands for. And thank you, Vintage, for joining us from Suriname. And Ano, thanks for that clarification. If you guys are joining me from Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of those sources, please let me know. Anyway, Paige, thanks for joining us as well. So here is the original image, and this is a pretty good image on its own, but does need a little bit of tweaking just to get it to, what we had it here for the final image, which of course looks, in my opinion, a lot better. So here is the original image. I'm going to start with the first step here, which is to scale and crop my image. So I'm going to come over here to Image, Scale Image, and I'm just going to do 1920 and hit the Tab key, which will bring that to 1280, and then I'll change the X and Y resolution to 300 and hit the Tab key as well, and just hit Scale. And then I'll hold Control and zoom in here to zoom in on my image, and then I'm going to grab the crop tool, and I'm going to make sure the fixed aspect ratio option is unchecked there, because I do want to sort of be able to freehand draw this crop tool. So all of my options are unchecked, except for the highlight opacity option, which is just going to only highlight the areas inside my crop. So I'm just going to click and drag this, and I'm going to drag it all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to have a little bit of the outside of my chair going outside the crop here, And now what I'm going to do is I'm using my guide. So I have this set to rule of thirds guides here. And I'm making it so that basically the brim of her hat is even on both sides of these guides here. And that's just going to ensure that she is nice and centered inside of this crop. So I'll release it right there, and I'm going to click inside to add the crop. And there's a little bit of room over here on the right side compared to the left of this chair, which is fine because she is looking in that direction. So, it's sort of drawing the eye in that direction anyway. And it's okay to leave a little bit of room there. And thank you, Drutgat and Ram for the clarification. Looks like most of you are joining from the YouTube watch pages and page as well. Thank you. All right. So next we are going to go to the Shadows Highlights feature. So I'm going to go to Colors, Shadows Highlights. And this time I usually, increase the shadows and sometimes I increase the highlights as well. What I'm going to do, instead of starting with the shadows like I usually do, I'm going to start with the highlights. And the reason is that there's a lot of highlights in this image, especially up here in the top, and then some on her face, some in this area of the image. And I think when you turn it up, and you can see on her arms as well, because this was so well lit behind me when I was taking this photograph, it was like the middle of the day. There's just too much highlights going on here. So what I did is I just sort of toned the highlights down a bit, and you can see that is helping to dim down some of the objects in the background, because this is obviously not a focal point of our image, so we don't want it being totally blown out. There are instances where you might want some sort of highlight in the background to be, prevalent. I don't think this is one of the cases, since this is just some piece of merchandise in the store. And thanks for joining us from Brazil, Clayton. Sorry if I'm destroying the pronouncement of your name. And now I'm going to tweak the shadows, and I'm going to look at mostly the details in the chair, since that is what is coming out with the shadows. I don't want those details competing too much with the model, which is why I don't want to turn this all the way up to around 50 or so, which is what I usually do. I do want to bring out some of the details, but not too much, so I'll go around 25. And I just want to mention real quick, I forgot this week to set the time and date like I usually do for my stream, which is why I think when I started this stream, we had a little bit lower of an audience than we usually do. So yeah, that was my bad. But looks like most of you guys were able to find the stream anyway, so that's good. But I think that takes away your ability to set a reminder. And so anyway, so now I'm going to adjust the white point here. And if I turn it down, it kind of dims down too much of the important parts of the image. And if I turn it too far up, it brings those highlights out again. So I definitely want to bring up the white point a little bit, but not too much. So I think around right there, it looks good. And as you can see, this totally changes the lighting dynamic of the photo, and it just makes it, make a little bit more sense. So, before I click OK, I do want to tweak the radius a bit, see what looks better. So I think turning the radius up a little bit is going to make it look better. And then I'm going to mess around with the compression. I think I like this. Turn down a tad. There's a before, there is an after, so I'll click OK. And I'm actually going to duplicate this image. I know I should have done that from the beginning, but I'm just going to duplicate that now so we can kind of compare as we go. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to adjust the color balance. So I'm going to go to Colors, Color Balance, and I think adding red to the midtones, which we're going to adjust the color balance for each of the 3 ranges of this image. But adding a tad bit of cyan looks a little bit better than red. There's already so much red in this photo that I don't want to add more, and I think that is a common mistake among photo editors or photographers, is that they try to add more of whatever color is in the photo. So it's not always the case. Sometimes you want to take a little bit away so that it's not being oversaturated with that color. And don't get me wrong, there are times where it does make sense to enhance the color more, to bring that color out. but I like to get a good balance of colors, unless it's something where there's like, a harsh, red light on the photo and you really want to bring that red light out. But actually, usually in that case, the lighting is going to do a lot of the work for you. You don't have to do too much extra in post. But now I'm going to come over here to the highlights. In this case, I think adding cyan to the highlights almost makes our model look, not as good. So I'm going to definitely not do that. Same with the magentas. And I don't want to add too much green because I don't want her to look sickly from, being covered in green. So I'm keeping that in mind. And then the blue doesn't look great, so I am going to add a touch of yellow. Not too much, though, because we are going to use the color temperature tool, and that is going to allow us to add some more of those yellows in here. And let me just decrease the red a bit. As you guys know, I don't like to add too much of any color, really. I think that looks better, so I'm going to click OK. And the next step is I'm going to adjust the levels here. So I'm going to go to Colors, Levels. And for those of you who joined in late, I did mention that I'm going to be airbrushing and adjusting the eyes a little bit, enhancing the eyes, which is something I don't usually do. But I think in this photo it looked a lot better when I did that. So stay tuned for that at the end. So I'm going to increase that midtone. So this is the shadows here, midtones, highlights. And so I'm just adjusting those levels to try to bring out the contrast, increase the brightness a little bit. And this is basically a fancy way of adjusting brightness contrast versus using the brightness contrast slider, which is another great tool, but it's just doesn't have as much control, and so I don't typically use it as much as the levels tool. But I'll click OK, because that looks pretty good. And here's a before. Of course, this was after we applied the shadows, highlights. This is the after, so this isn't a full before and after, but I think it gives you a pretty good idea of some progress we're making. And now I'm going to come over here to Colors, Saturation, and I'm going to turn the saturation up. I don't want to do it too much because, as you can see, that looks awful. Way too many colors. So saturation always turns the intensity of your colors up. But I do want to turn the intensity up a little bit, or a decent amount, I should say. There's a before, there is an after. I might be a tad over doing it a little bit here. And there still are a couple, well, one other color tool that I'll be using for this, so I don't want to overdo it. So there's a before, there's an after. I think that looks pretty good, so I'll click OK. All right, so for the next step here, I'm going to adjust the color temperature. So I'll go to Colors, Color Temperature. And in previous images that I've done live, I usually only add or subtract 5,000 Kelvin from the original temperature by dragging the intended temperature slider. In this case, I noticed it looked a lot better, at least the first time around, when I cranked this up by 1,000. And in this case, I think the color balance is a little different than the original, but I do like adding a bit more of this color temperature, or the intended temperature, cranking up the color temperature itself. So there's a before, there is an after. And the reason I did that was because there's a lot of natural light coming in here again, but there's also some more orange light coming from the lighting in the building. So I'm trying to enhance both of those, just make the scene a little bit warmer. If she was dressed in winter clothing and was looking really cold for whatever reason, then we would maybe turn the temperature down. But in this case, it doesn't make sense to have a colder looking image. So I'll click OK. And next I'm going to adjust the curve. So I'm going to go to Colors, Curves. And I'm going to click in the center of this curve here. And I'm going to click and drag this portion of the curve down. And welcome to all of you just joining. Don't forget, I believe you could start the live session over from the beginning if you want to start from the top, or you can just continue watching live. But I'm just adding a little bit of curves to this. And of course, you guys can always watch these tutorials, you know, anytime on our YouTube channel, because I do put these up on the YouTube channel once they're finished processing, you know, after I've done the live session. So there's a before, there is an after, and I'll click OK. So this was, again, after I adjusted the shadows, highlights, so not quite the beginning or the start of this tutorial, but pretty close, and then there is where we're at right now. All right, so for the next portion, we're going to touch this up with the airbrush tool. So I'm going to hold Control and zoom in a bit, and we're going to adjust the sharpness of this image a little bit later. But I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on this layer. So let me actually change the name of this layer to Edited Photo and hit Enter. And thank you for joining us from Fiji, Ratu. And I'm going to grab my airbrush tool now, hold Control and zoom in a bit. And so I just airbrushed throughout the entire face here. So I'm going to, first of all, start off with an increased airbrush size, not too much. I'm using the brackets on my keyboard to increase and decrease the size of this brush. And I'm going to start with the opacity turned up a little bit, around 50%, and then maybe turn the hardness up just a tad. It doesn't have to be a really hard brush. Maybe go 25. And then what I'm going to do, as I get tongue-tied, is I'm going to hold Control and grab a color from our subject's complexion here. And I'm going to just click and draw. I'm just drawing lines that follow the contours, the natural contours of her face. And the whole point of this is really to just soften the complexion. And for me, it just kind of fits with the somewhat softer lighting of the room here. And I'm guessing that comment from Shock, if that's how you say your name, is for the model. Probably not for my voice. And so now we're just following, again, the contours of the face here. I don't like to overdo this stuff, as you guys know, so I'm not going to do this too much. Hold Control to grab a new color. And I do that very often, especially when we're working with complexions, because you don't want to start adding new colors to the subject's complexion throughout the photo, because then it'll really look bad. So we're just evening out the complexion here. Hold Control-Z. As you can see, I didn't grab a color from here, and it just caused the lighting on her chin to be too dark, and it screwed up the evenness of her complexion. And I'm going to hold Control and zoom in. I'm going to take out some of the reflections here from the light. And I'm going to decrease the size of my brush here, hold Control, and grab a color. And I'm just going to paint over some of the reflections here, and I'm continuously holding Control and clicking to take colors here. I know I've said that a lot, but just reiterating how often I am grabbing a new color. And up here as well, I'm going to get rid of some of this reflection here. And I'm going to back up holding Control-Z. I want to do all this kind of at the same time because I want the complexion right here to all be the same color, more or less. Control-Z. Control-Z again. I'm going to decrease the opacity because I think this is too strong right now. And maybe even increase the size. All right. And let me come back down here. If you want to really make this high fashion, you can kind of accentuate these lighter colors on her cheeks. That'll just kind of make her face look more angular, and that's more of a calling card of high fashion editing. And I'm sorry, I'm going to back up a little bit. I think I excuse me, added a bit too much coloring right here. Just want to make sure I get this right and don't make it look too artificial or smudged. So there's a before, there's an after, so we've kind of softened up the complexion a bit and got rid of some of the reflections from the light. But we didn't overdo a lot of these edits, so always keep that in mind. You don't want to go too far with airbrushing people's faces. All right, so now what I'm going to do is hold Control, and I'm going to grab a color from the lips here, one of these nice rouge, like pink colors, and I'm going to increase the size of my brush to a pretty large size, and then I'm going to decrease the hardness, And what I'm basically doing is adding like blush right here. So this model happened to have, not a lot of makeup on, and she has a good natural complexion. But for this particular photo, I just like the way it looked with a little bit of blush added. So I'll add that blush. And you don't want to paint over too many times, which is why I try to add the blush in one stroke, and I create a circular stroke as I do that, because then it'll start to compound. Since we have the opacity set pretty low, it'll compound those opacities and make the blush more and more prevalent, or like thicker and thicker basically. All right, so that looks pretty good. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, why am I getting so tongue-tied today? I don't know. Okay, so next I'm going to duplicate this photo here. And actually, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete that. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer. And sorry, guys, I'm trying to multitask here, reading comments and editing this photo. So sorry if I'm annoying you. But all right, so I'm going to name this one Eye Enhancements. And I'm going to hit Enter. And what I'll do is I'll grab my Ellipse Select tool. And of course, as you can tell by the name of this layer, I'm going to be enhancing the eye. So I'm going to hold Control and zoom in. And I'm going to click and drag this, and keep in mind my layer mode right now is set to add to the current selection. It is not set to replace the current selection. So make sure you have that setting set for your GIMP as well as you're doing this portion, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to make sure I select all of the iris here and try to select as little of the white parts of the eyes as possible. And now I'll move over here, and the reason that I want to have the add to current selection option set is that I can draw over here and cover up this iris as well, or select this iris, I should say. And if I hold Control and zoom out, you'll see that both of these are selected now. And now what I'll do is I'll grab my Lasso tool or my Free Select tool, and the reason for this is because, as you guys can obviously tell, the iris does not stay in this full area. This overlaps a little bit of her eyelid, and we don't want to add any of the eyelid to the portion of the eye enhancements that we're going to be editing here. And make sure your mode here is set to subtract from the current selection with the Lasso tool here. And now I'm just going to lasso out any part of the eyelid, and I might have missed a chunk there, which is fine. It's right here, I believe. And then I'm going to move over and select this portion. So again, only selecting out the eyelash, and I'll hit Enter. And I'm actually going to delete this eye enhancement layer, because what I meant to do was hold Control C and then hit Control V. And what that did is it copied and pasted the area inside our selection area. And actually, Control Z real quick, let me make sure that I'm not getting this eyelid in here, this bottom eyelid. So let me try that again. So making sure we're on our edited photo layer, I'll hit Control C and then Control V. And then I'm going to click to put this on a new layer, and double click here and change this to Eye Enhancements. There we go. And now what I want to do is I want to enhance just the eye enhancements layer. So making sure I'm clicked on that layer, I'm going to come over here and go to Colors, Levels. And this is going to allow us to brighten up the eyes here and really bring out the color in that iris. So it just creates a cool effect. I don't want to overdo it because that looks really terrible. That looks like she's some sort of like zombie or mutant or something. So I do want to just barely turn this up and just make sure I'm only enhancing the colors of the iris. You can always bring in the shadows over here if it's getting a little bit too bright. So there's a before, there's an after. So her eyes look a little bit brighter. And I'm going to click OK. We still need to turn up the intensity of the colors here. So I'm going to go to Colors, Saturation, and I'm going to turn up the saturation a little bit. I don't want to overdo it because, again, it looks too fake. I see that a lot in edited photos. People just go a little bit too crazy. So I'm just going to turn it up to the point where it looks a little bit more natural. So I'm always like right on that threshold of, the most I can turn the color up without it looking artificial. So I'll click OK. And I'll hold Control and zoom out a bit. So if I hide the eyes, that's what they looked like before, and that's what they look like after. So they just look a little bit brighter and a little bit more colorful, which helps to bring the attention to the eyes. All right, so next I'm going to sharpen this image. So I'll come over here to the edited photo layer and go to Filters, Enhance, Sharpen Unsharp Mask. And I like this just on the default settings with 3 as the radius and 5 as the amount, so I'll click OK. And then I'm going to come over here and make sure I do the same to the eye, so I'll just click on the eye enhancements layer and then click Repeat Sharpen Unsharp Mask. So that'll make sure the eyes get sharpened as well. If you're happy with this, by the way, and let me hold Control and zoom in a bit, you do want to real quick click on that eye enhancements layer, decrease the size of your brush. I'm on the eraser tool now, and you want to make sure you erase any parts that maybe spilled over onto the whites of the eyes, or just any parts of the eyes that you don't want to be selected here. And then once you have done that, you can always right-click and go to Merge Down, and that'll make sure that everything is on the same layer if you want that. And you can always keep them on separate layers if you don't want them to be on the same layer. All right, so the last thing we're going to do here, of course, is add a vignette. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll just name this Vignette. Make sure the fill width is set to transparency and click OK. So now I'll go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette. And now I'm going to adjust the radius down a bit. This is just so I can see what kind of shape this vignette has. Right now it has a proportion of 1, which means it's the same proportion or the same ratio as the image dimensions. But in this case, I want it to more so be the shape of our model, so I'm going to adjust the proportion here so that it more so frames the model. And then I'm going to adjust the softness and actually the radius too, because I don't want it actually closing in on her that much. So I'm going to increase the radius a bit and then adjust the softness here and the gamma to make sure there's not too much black spilling over our model. There's a before, there's an after. I'll click OK. Come down here and make sure I'm still clicked on my vignette layer and adjust the opacity of this layer. I always adjust it so that the vignette is just visible. I don't want there to be any hard lines visible from the vignette, so always keeping that in mind. But you can see this frames the photo a lot nicer and it draws the eye in a lot better to our model. All right, so now I'm going to export this. So I'll go to File, Export As, and this one I'll just name Cowgirl in Trinket. I don't know how to spell Trinket actually. That's wrong, but I'll do it anyway. Maybe it's right, I don't know. If you guys can confirm that, let me know. All right, so now I'm going to go to Edited Photos and hit Export. Turn this all the way up, export again, and there we go. So I'm getting a question here from Robert. Is there an easy way to cover a car in a picture with another picture? I'm not really sure what you're trying to say there. You can always just import a photo from another photo and just move it into place to cover it up and use the eraser tool or one of the selection tools to select out anything you don't want in there. Real quick, guys, so next week and the week after, I have a commitment on Friday during the time I usually do these live tutorials, so I'm going to be posting my schedule for those 2 weeks. It's only going to be temporary. It's not going to be a permanent move of the day and time, so keep that in mind for my next live tutorial session. But I do want to thank you guys for joining me. You can check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit my website at daviesmediadesign.com for more GIMP tutorials. And you can enroll in my best-selling GIMP photo editing masterclass on Udemy. And of course, you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And all of those links are already in the description. And I'm getting another quick question here. And so can I do a tutorial where I work with the photo with a bad color cast using gray merge? I'll definitely look into that. I do appreciate the request, and I'm getting another from Robert, like a car wrap. I'll talk to you after the live tutorial, Robert, but hopefully I can answer that question for you. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining me for today's tutorial. And be sure to check out my next recorded tutorial because I got a new backdrop, which I've been waiting on for a while. So I'm getting very close to having a completely finished set here. So it should be really cool. So definitely check that out in my next tutorial. And also I want to announce real quick that I do have a new post up on my website on the top 20 GIMP graphic design tutorials on YouTube. So definitely check that list out if you are into graphic design. All right, guys, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.